morning, everyone. My name is Jen, and welcome to another wonderful Aquarium Online Academy. Joining me today, who you cannot see, but is actually going to be showcasing all the magic right behind me, is my colleague Lynette. Now, friends, I am so very excited today to talk to you all about one of my favorite topics, seagrass, marine meadows, right? These are plants that are actually underwater, and so I'm really excited to be able to talk a little bit about them today because I feel like they're kind of like that hidden treasure that not that many people know about or really kind of talk about. So this will be really exciting today. If at any point in time you have questions, we would love to be able to hear from you. You are more than welcome to text right on in 562-286-1838. Or you can also email questions down below at live@lbaop.org. Now, for our text questions, they are during when we're live. So this is currently Tuesday, the 10th of December at 9 a.m. So we'll be able to accept any kind of questions that are texted on in all the way till about 9:30 to when our program ends. And then afterwards, you're welcome to text that line again. We may not answer till later, but we'll also be checking our email down below. All right, so when you think about seagrass, does anything kind of come to mind? Like if you went ahead and you're like, seagrass, and you went ahead and envisioned it, what kind of things do you think about? I know for me, I think about, well, grass, right? Like if it's seagrass, it must be grass that's underneath the water, and it pretty much is. It's a little bit different, but we can go on ahead and maybe get a view of the seagrass, and really to get us in the mood of what it's like to be underneath a marine meadow. So let's see if we can imagine it. Here we go. Now, what's really cool about this, my friends, is we actually have a really dynamic area where we are seeing all of this seagrass right here being whooshed all along, right? We can see that right there. But something else that's really cool is that there's also some seaweed back behind here. You're like, wait, Jen, I thought we were focusing on seagrass today. And you know what, friends? You're right. But there are important differences to note between the seagrass that we see here that looks beautiful and flowy versus our algae right here, which honestly is beautiful and flowy as well. So we're going to get a chance to kind of compare and contrast the two. That's tricky because you're like, well, I do see that they are both green. But as you get a chance to look at this video just a little bit longer, what kind of differences do you notice between the two? So go on ahead, take a minute or so, and just kind of see, are there any similarities between the two? So things that you notice that maybe might be the same between this eelgrass here that we're seeing, and then also the seaweed, this kelp right here, type of brown seaweed that we see versus our seagrass. You're always welcome to text in those answers to 562-286-1838. So I know for me, one thing that I notice that's kind of the same between these two is that the way they move, right? So if I'm looking at here, it looks like it's kind of like a stormy sea, or that there's a lot of surge, meaning that there's a lot of water that's pretty much going back and forth, right? We could see it. It almost reminds me of like a windy day when your hair is just going dealing with all of this right here. But I don't know if mine ever gets that particularly crazy. But here we're seeing that's very flexible, right? All of these grasses and all of this kelp right here is just swaying in the water. It's not rigid or it's not structured like a tree would be on land, right? If we think about something that may be similar, because we're talking about meadows, and these kelp actually create kelp forests. So the kelp, so trees, right, on land may be like really kind of sturdy, right? When we think about plants on land, they're not moving anywhere, of course. We have the air and the wind that would blow at the trees and they would stand tall. But if you look, all of our seaweed and also all of our seagrass right here, both of them just kind of go with the flow. And actually that's super duper important because that enables them to really kind of survive. Could you imagine having a really kind of strong woodiness to yourself and being able to just kind of deal with all of this power that's underneath that water? You really wouldn't be able to survive too well. You'd probably break, get soggy, and you'd break off and then be very sad in the water. So getting a chance to be flexible for either type, either seaweed or seagrass, is definitely key. Now, with seaweed, they actually, well, let's talk about seagrasses first, actually. So if we think about plants on land, what are some things that they need to survive? What do plants need on land to survive? Now, if I was thinking about it, I'd probably go with sunlight, right? So I would need some sun. Yeah, we can switch on over to my dot cam here so you can see. We would need sunlight. We would need nutrients or vitamins, right? I'll picture them as little teeny tiny friends right here. And then we would go on ahead and need, well, what else? Probably oxygen, right? Or carbon dioxide. Also little dots right here, right? So these are the main things that we would need in order to survive. Now in the ocean, there's going to be plenty of this gas, so we are good there. We also need water, but if we think about it, water is going to be everywhere in the ocean, so we don't really need to worry about that too much. So I'll put water right here too. So for our seagrass, much like plants, right, I'm going to have kind of like seagrass. There we go. So here we have our seagrass. They're actually two words. For our seagrasses here, this is actually going to be kind of underneath the sand. Because believe it or not, seagrass lives in sand. And what they do is they have roots. They have like a root system, so we can pretend these are roots, much like any kind of land plant does. But they have something else called rhizomes, meaning that they're little roots that kind of run along and will basically create more plants, more baby plants as they go along. So a lot of this is happening underneath the sand where you cannot see. So these are roots and rhizomes. And from here, we go on ahead and there starts to shoot out all of these baby little seagrasses. And that's how we end up having all of these seagrass beds. All these little roots and all these grasses are coming out right here. Okay? So that's for our seagrass, that they happen to have those different parts. They have this root system down here that stores all the nutrients, and it also helps to anchor the plant into the sand as they send all of these little shoots upward, and this is all of our grass. So this is the grass. Oh, maybe I'll write it in a different color. Oopsies. So here we have our grass, and here we have our root system. So again, all of these roots are able to get the nutrients that are needed. They're able to anchor down into the soil to be able to hold on to any kind of those whooshy, kind of turbulent times in the ocean. And then they're able to send up all of these little grass blades right here to get that sunlight, to soak in that carbon dioxide too. And then to also maybe get any additional nutrients and vitamins that maybe they can't as a root system. Now, our seaweed, on the other hand, so in this case, with our seaweed, this one is kelp that we're looking at. It's a little bit different. It actually doesn't have a root system at all. We can imagine this as like a little series of rocks right here on our sandy seafloor with a little bit of rockiness right here. And what they have instead, it almost looks like roots that are on top of a rock, but this is actually called a holdfast. Can you guess what the holdfast does? It holds the seaweed down. Yep. So it acts in a similar way structurally as our root systems do, that hold, that anchor the seagrass into the sand. But in this case, this holdfast just anchors it to the rock instead. And then from there, put it that way, here is kind of like the stem of our seaweed right here. And then it's called the stipe. And then from here, because our seaweed is actually much longer and larger usually than seagrass, it has to have a special adaptation or special feature to help it float. And so what we see here are almost like little balloon structures right here, the little circles, that help it to be able to float top of the water to be able to get that sunlight. And so here we have those little floaties that are filled with gas. And then we have our, what's kind of like leaves right here, and they're called blades. So we have our hold fast right here. We have our blades right here. Sorry if it's difficult to read. And then we actually have what we like to call, instead of a stem, it's called a stipe. S-T-I-P-E. All right, so here is kind of some similarities and differences between the two. Our seaweed still uses the vitamins. They're actually using it, they're gathering it from the actual blades right here. And they're able to use the sunlight in the same way. They just have little extra floaty balloons that help them to be able to get that up to the top. Those floaty balloons are called nematocysts, in case you were curious. I'm not going to write that because it's a long word on this very small board right here. But hopefully you get an idea now of some of the similarities and differences between our seagrass that we have right here and then also our seaweed that we have right here too. All right, so now that we have a general idea of seagrasses and seaweeds, our goal today is to still be able to focus on that seagrass. So if we go on ahead and we maybe go on and look at maybe a video of seagrass, it can have some lovely animals in there if you'd like, Lynette, dealer's choice on that. But I'd love for us just to go on ahead and look at this right here, right? Here's another type of seagrass. Now, it looks very different than the one that we saw earlier. Believe it or not, there are over 70 different species of seagrass. So there's a lot of different kinds of seagrass out there. We have two specifically in California. We have surfgrass, and then we also have common eelgrass. So those are the main two that we have here, in case you were curious. But if we go ahead and we think about this eelgrass or surfgrass that we have right back here, what do you think might be some benefits to having all of this beautiful lushness down below? How do you think that might help some of the animals that live down there? Any thoughts? Well, if I think about any kind of habitat, right, because this little marine meadow right here would be considered one, I would think that much like all the others, right, they're going to serve as a home for many of these animals. Meaning that if we think about our home and how that benefits us, right, our homes will usually keep us safe. In my neighborhood around my home, there's going to be things that help me when I'm hungry, right? So there's going to be areas that these animals can go on ahead and eat and munch on, right? So they're going to be able to find their food in this home as well. And so, you know, and it just helps protect them too from any kind of predators that may be around, or maybe if they want to go on ahead and find some food, they can this could be protection that then helps them to be able to kind of stalk and grab their food. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit for how that may be beneficial for some of the animals that call this area their home. But if we go ahead and we think about, okay, that root system, right? That root system is really beneficial for these, for this area in particular, because not only does that root system help benefit the eelgrass by holding them down during turbulent times or storms, but it actually keeps the sand in place, which is super beneficial there. And it also goes on ahead and creates this lattice work of stability within that environment. Now, there's some areas, if we think about like even on land or in the ocean, that maybe kind of change, right? They're what we like to call like dynamic systems, meaning that, you know, they may look one way at a certain period of time, and they may look completely different during others. Eelgrass beds, if they're given their fair chances, are going to be able to hopefully create a very stable environment. And that is not only a service to the animals that live here, but also to us too. So as I mentioned during storminess, right, they might hold down the fort here underneath the water, but whenever there is large storm surge, believe it or not, eelgrasses can also help protect coastal communities as well. So that's an ecosystem service, is what we like to call, that is provided for us, which is quite nice. Something else that's really great too is it's actually able to trap a lot of carbon from our atmosphere, and it's able to kind of trap that into the sandiness down below, which is incredible too. And then also it really helps within biodiversity. So for this area right here, you know, creating a very stable habitat, creating areas where animals can go on a hide, maybe areas that animals can feel comfortable giving birth because there's a lot of food nearby. It can be a really rich community, and I'm excited to go into how this area can be a really rich community. So let's go on ahead and Lynette, maybe let's start with our surf perch friends that we have right here. So here's one of our classic animals that we have here. Actually, I think these might be a different kind of perch that I see here. But regardless, these perch are really kind of helpful and kind of are one of the quintessential things that you might think about or that you might get a chance to see when we focus in on some fish that may live within this eelgrass community. So I'll step off to the side real quick. Maybe some, there we go. We have some that are kind of moving on by right here. So we have some surf perch right there. And what's really great about many of these fish is that they're able to eat, well, many of kind of the invertebrates. If we go on ahead and we look at some of this grass, right, there's a lot of fuzziness on there. And believe it or not, friends, that's actually algae that is growing on this eelgrass. So most of the time, if we go on ahead and we think about having this algae covering over all of these eelgrass blades, do you think that's beneficial? Let's think about this. If our eelgrass uses these blades to do photosynthesis, right, to be able to get that energy from the sun, and they're being covered up with algae, do you think they're able to grab as much sunlight when they're covered with algae? Not so much, right? So believe it or not, there are little teeny tiny critters that go on ahead and are actually able to eat some of the algae that's off of this. But of course, there always needs to be checks and balances, and so many of these surf perch are able to eat some of those critters that live on the algae themselves. And depending upon the type of fish, some of the other fish actually may eat the algae that is off of the blades of the seagrass, or they'll go on ahead and eat other invertebrates like, little snails and little worms and stuff that may live in the actual sandy bottom itself. What's really cool is you can also see a kelp fish, which is located right here. You'll see that some of them are really camouflaged, and they will live sometimes in the eelgrass. But of course, it's named kelp fish, so it'll also live in kelp too. So there is some overlap between some of the habitats, as we had a chance to see in our very first picture. All right. Now let's go on ahead and let's try to find another animal. Let's see. We've been talking a lot about the eelgrass. Let's see if we can maybe showcase the sand a little bit and look at some of the animals that live in more of that sandy habitat. All right. Lynette, I did ask you to put something up with the sandy habitat. I just see sand here. Oh, is there something in here? Can you all see it? Wait! Oh! She did. Do you see it too? Yes, exactly. Silly me. Talk about camouflage, right? Being able to blend in with its surroundings so well. Here we have an armored star. Did you see it? You're like, yeah, Jen, it's been there the entire time. But here we have an armored star, two actually right here. And we have them in the sand, right? So if we go on ahead and we think about sea stars, may not be the usual kind of vibrant color that you might see, but why do you think, if we think about the sand star, right, we mentioned that it is very camouflaged. It blends in very nicely with our sandy bottom right here, which is pretty awesome. But do you notice anything else about this sand star right here? I don't know if we have another view of the sand star available. Here we go. Excellent, thank you. And so here's a really good one. They're kind of up and roaming around. It almost reminds me of like zombies, where they kind of come out of the sand and like, and they roam around. I don't think they actually make that noise, though I'm not sure. I have yet to put a hydrophone, underwater microphone, underneath the water to try to listen to them. But if we go on ahead and we notice these friends, right, they are very slow moving. They are not moving very fast at all, but they are slow and steady. And you know what? That can win the race for sure, right? So as we go on ahead and see, we have a little sand dab flatfish friend right there. They are just kind of gliding on top of the sand. And that's pretty much what they do. They will just go on ahead and glide above, and they will go on ahead and eat things like olive snails. Olive snails might go on ahead and eat some of the algae that may be actually on top of the sand right here, or also some of the algae that just happens to be around the seagrass and also on the sandy bottom right here. So it's one of the many different kinds of invertebrates, right, snails, that will go on ahead and kind of munch on and just basically kind of keep the areas clean. As I mentioned before, there always needs to be checks and balances so that way one population doesn't get too out of hand versus another. So our sand stars are a great example of one that's kind of hidden underneath the sand but are pretty cool animals. I correct myself, they are armored stars, but they do live in the sand. Sand stars are a little bit different, but you can see they have a little bit more of that armor that is on them. All right, friends, if you do have any questions along the way or like, oh my gosh, armored stars, they're my favorite. I'm so excited that you covered them. We'd love to always hear from you. Feel free to text on in at 562-951-1838. But there was another animal that just dashed on by really quick. Let's see if Lynette can go on ahead and get a nicer, closer up picture of that friend right there. Kind of awkward. I think she did it again. I am not seeing this animal. Maybe it's just me. I'm sure it's just me. Right? It's right there? Is that right? No. Over there. No, that's a piece of algae. Do you see it too? Let's go on ahead. Even closer up. Thank you. Right here we go on ahead. And we actually have one of our flatfish. Can you guess how it gets its name? It is very round, but in a different direction. It is also very flat, right? So if we go ahead and we think about like a pancake, for instance, right? From the top, it may look very round, but from the side, it's going to be very thin. Now, if you imagine like a football-shaped pancake, that's pretty much what this animal looks like right here, right? So here we have kind of like an oblong, like an oval shape, and then it's very, very flat or very compressed is what we like to call it. Now, believe it or not, flatfish actually start out as normal-looking fish with one eye on each side, which is pretty amazing. But over time, as they grow from their super baby larval stage to the grown-up that you see here, nice and proud, one eye will actually migrate to the other side until it has two eyes on one side. Now, fun fact, the average of eye migration to one to the other is actually very similar to humans being left-handed versus right-handed. So there's, on average, majority of right-facing flatfish versus left-facing ones. Ta-da! So here we go. We have one of our flatfish friends. Now, you may be able to tell, right, that it is very well camouflaged to this. What's pretty incredible about flatfish is that they will mimic their habitat coloration-wise. So there's been other tests that have been done, other, I should say, experiments, and making observations of putting these flatfish, or a variety of flatfish that can kind of change color on their skin, to different kinds of surfaces. So for example, a checkerboard, right? They've been able to kind of notice that the color changing pigments on that particular fish will actually change and mimic an actual checkerboard, which is pretty amazing. They've tried a variety of other different kinds of patterns too for it to settle on, and it will kind of eventually kind of match the best that it can to that as well. So pretty incredible, these flatfish. So here we go. We can enjoy and respect our flatfish friend right here. If we're lucky enough, we may be able to also see what it looks like underneath. Let's see as it goes on ahead and it kind of moves away. Ooh, not quite. It's tricky to see. But underneath our flatfish, even though we're seeing all this coloration on this side, it's actually pretty much white on the bottom. Like off-whites, like, yeah, that's eggshell white, right? It's going to be just basically kind of cream colored underneath. And that's because, well, why would you bother putting any kind of energy into coloring your bottom side when no one's ever going to see it, right? Only this top side is what any kind of animal might see, predator or prey. So it's going to go on ahead and really kind of focus all of its energy on this coloration right here. Such a great face, even though we're seeing it from the back. There it goes. All right. So far we've had a chance to look at different parts of the kind of like a food web, right, within the ocean here. I touched a little bit upon how we have different types of animals, or how seagrass and eelgrass goes on ahead and lends itself well to creating a diverse kind of habitat. And we've talked a little bit about the different kinds of fish, focusing a little bit on some perch, like surf perch. We've also had a chance to talk a little bit about, the armored star, and then also the flatfish. So all of these animals serve different kind of purposes and eat different kinds of things within this particular ecosystem. But there's one, if we think about kind of like from small to big, that we have yet to cover, and that is actually our stingrays. So stingrays are a great animal that actually lives in here too, and one of the larger ones as well. And it's kind of a helpful indicator on seeing whether or not our marine meadows are a healthy place for many of our other animals to live and thrive, really. And so our stingrays are going to be ones that really kind of eat a lot of things that are also in the sand, right? So we can get a nice view, an overarching view here of those marine meadows and seeing all that grass. But if you go on ahead and you look a little bit closer, and where our stingray is, you'll see there's kind of a patch of sand. And so our stingrays actually have really flat teeth, and those flat teeth are able to crunch any kind of hard things in that sand. So for instance, any kind of like clam that may be really hard, that has two shells, they can kind of crunch right through it, or even kind of some crabs as well. They'll go on ahead and crunch through that shell and eat all of the juicy goodness on the inside. Also very well camouflaged underneath that sand right there. So these marine meadows are really important environments, and unfortunately they are dealing with a lot of different threats right now, a lot of them having to do with us humans. And so that may be looking like excess runoff from land, as many of these are kind of near the area where humans kind of reside. So there's a lot of runoff for when it rains. All of that pollution on our land basically runs off the land into the ocean, and so these are some of the organisms that are affected the most by some of that runoff. General pollution is definitely another thing that affects these, and then also kind of development as well can also kind of hinder the happiness of these kinds of animals too. Aside from that, though, there's also invasive algae that will take the place and outgrow and outcompete some of our eelgrass friends right here. And so that invasive algae will kind of take over the area, grow faster than our eelgrass, and then it'll be an invasive algae meadow instead. So there's that they have to compete with too. Luckily for us, there are some areas or some scientists that are really kind of working to get some of these meadows and these seagrasses back, which is really exciting. And so fingers crossed that we can slowly be able to increase the habitat and bring these habitats back to where they once were, so that way we can have another happy and healthy ecosystem. All right, friends, our time is just about up, but I want to thank you so very much for joining myself as well as Lynette today. We really had a good time talking about eelgrasses, seeing what is similar and different between eelgrass and seaweed, and then also get a chance to look at some of the animals and their adaptations and ways that they call this eelgrass home. All right, thank you so very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.